I bought a course that was so bad, it made things crystal clear. I'm Dr. Catrina Mitchum, and when I left higher education, I bought a course that was supposed to help me get from PhD to industry. It was supposed to help me get a job. It was expensive, but I was burnt out and overwhelmed and had no idea where to get started. There were red flags. The pushy salesman should have been my first clue. But when you're in a position where you just need out, you're looking for answers anywhere, right? So what made this course so shitty? Once I paid for it and I got in, there were a bunch of squares everywhere, right? That had different topics. It wasn't clear where to start. Things weren't labeled like week 1 or module 1 or start here. It wasn't clear how I was supposed to get started or progress through the materials, right? I was already in a state of overwhelm. The reason I had bought a course was to get that guidance, right? To not have to go and curate my own YouTube channel in order to figure out what to do. The reason I bought the course was so that all of the information and all of the what to do was in a curated space for me, right? I shouldn't have had to guess, but I did have to guess. So I took a guess and I had jumped into LinkedIn and was trying to do some networking there. So there was a LinkedIn module, and so that's where I started. When I got into that LinkedIn module, there were a bunch of videos that were either talking head at me for 30 to 45 minutes. It was so much information that I didn't know what to do with it. There was no, the first thing you should do is write a headline. This is how you write a headline. Now go write the headline, right? It was a bunch of information. It was a bunch of pontificating, which is a big word, but it means talking like theoretically about something without grounding it, right? And it's usually pretty pompous. So it was clear that this person thought they were better than the people that they were helping, which is not an approach that you want to take. It immediately puts people off, right? You're the expert on that thing. Don't treat your students or your clients like they're stupid. So there were some of those videos. There were no real like activities. There was a bunch of other videos that were like the Q&A recordings. But there was no way to navigate through or to know what questions were being answered or at what timestamps they were being answered. So it was just kind of like a dump of content into a space that they had started to curate and organize, but there was no, it was like a library, but without the Dewey Decimal System, right? Or without a way to really look up what you need. But it also assumed that you knew what you needed, right? And that doesn't make for a good course. It makes for a good library, right? Because then you have librarians who can help you figure out where to get started. The one thing they did do right is somebody was giving feedback. So I could get some feedback on my LinkedIn, which was difficult because I hadn't yet picked a path. I didn't know what industry to go to. And that was part of what this was supposed to help me do. And all it did was list potential industries that work well with PhDs. None of them were really it for me. So when I got in there and I figured out like, this isn't good. As I said, I had already started networking on LinkedIn. And so I started reaching out to that network, not to ask about jobs, which is what I had been previously doing, but to ask about whether or not they had bought a course, right? So this was the first course outside of formal education that I had ever bought. And so I didn't know if like this was a common thing, if people bought courses all the time. And so I started asking, have you ever bought a course? And what was your experience? I usually got like, I've had some really good ones, but I've also had some really bad ones. And then when people would tell me about the really bad ones, there started to be some similarities. I started to notice that the ones that were really bad ones were similar to mine, right? There was no how to get started. There was no path through the material. There was just a collection of videos with no real action taking. So my background is in teaching and learning. I was teaching teachers before I decided to leave higher education. And so I knew right away that this was an area that I could go into, right? That I can make a difference in, that I could change the way people are seeing what courses are, because learning doesn't equal content, right? If you have been in a formal education setting at any point in time, you've probably been in a class where somebody stood at the front of the room and just talked at you and you didn't learn a damn thing, right? Or they stood there and talked at you and they engaged with you, right? And that's the difference. Online, that engagement piece drops off, right? There's no discussion of the thing, and that discussion, or the detailed note taking, that's not just regurgitation, that piece is so important to the learning process. It helps you to recall information and put that information into action, even if that action is just critically thinking about it at first. And so there are ways to do that online, right? 2020 was not the first time courses had been taught online. It's been studied for years. In fact, distance learning courses were happening back when there was a horse and buggy. They weren't perfect because they were called correspondence courses. So you would get your materials and your lecture notes and an activity or an essay from the teacher. You'd do the thing, you'd send it back, they'd send it. That was the way that things used to happen. But technology has made it so that we can actually give information, explain how to use the information, and build this recall and action cycle that is more conducive to how we learn and how we make the things that we consume stick, right? And so I was like, I can fix this. But the thing I didn't know how to do was business, right? Like my PhD is in rhetoric. And so I theoretically understood marketing, but putting it into practice is a whole different thing. Like I knew the information, and I have had to, over the last 3 years, practice and practice and practice. And the learner populations are different, right? In higher education, they come to me. I don't have to worry about whether or not they're going to buy from me. They're already in my class. It's already been sold. Now, sometimes as a writing teacher, I would have to sell the value of learning what I was teaching, but there wasn't any flexibility in whether or not I changed what I did. And so I felt like an imposter at first. Like I got this course creation-ish down, but there is this piece about creating and selling courses outside of a formal space that's different, right? And so I had to go through that process of validating things and learning from the people that I was trying to teach in order to create something that was useful, that people could complete, that they felt confident that they would get what they needed out of it. And so the journey is weird. But one of the things that came out of it was something that I actually give away for free. And it's a course, Course Maker Jumpstart. And so what it does is it walks you through, like, let's get all of our ideas out there. Let's pick our favorites. Because there was a time when I thought I was going to teach people how to do video because it's something I taught in the classroom. It's something I know how to do, but it wasn't something I loved to do, right? And so taking that list of things that you can and could and might teach about, picking out your favorites, and then asking people, right? When I created my membership, it came out of somebody saying, hey, have you thought about doing a membership? And I said, no, I hadn't. And then I immediately went to LinkedIn. It's like, okay, did a poll to find out if a membership in creating courses is something that anybody else had any interest in, right? And that was one of my validation methods. And so the Jumpstart takes you through that process all the way to writing good questions. And asking good questions for your marketing is one of the things that I think gets left off a lot. I don't need to know certain information about you. I don't need to know the name of your dog. I don't need to know if you're a cat person. I don't even need to know your gender, right? To know whether or not what I'm doing is going to help you. And so writing the right questions is a really big deal. So if you want that free Course Maker Jumpstart, it is in the description. In my next video, I want to talk about kind of the evolution from doing one-on-one work to having some group things, right? It wasn't smooth, it wasn't streamlined, it was totally messy, but I'm going to kind of break down the stages and phases that I went through so I can help you see where you might pull those things together.